Right, stories are engines for creating meaning. And writing stories is pretty easy. All you have to do is manufacture meaning out of absolutely nothing. Right, so you've got your artists, your musicians, your animators, your actors, your cinematographers, all trying to put together some kind of stimulus that the audience will enjoy. Basically, pretty stuff. But it's almost a cliche when talking about Hollywood, for instance, to say that all the spectacle in the world just doesn't mean jack. People just don't really care how pretty a picture is or how nice the music is. I mean, sure, they might attach some kind of external meaning to it, but that's just stuff they're bringing into the movie theater. At that point, you're not telling a story, you're making a Rorschach test. Alright, let me explain. I want you to close your eyes and imagine a woman walking into a room holding a baby. That's it, that's all. So that image I just fed you probably didn't mean much for you. Maybe if you imagine like a particular woman you know or a really, really cute baby, you got some kind of emotional reaction. But otherwise, it's just meaningless noise. But just about any image can be made into a meaningful expression. All that it takes is the right context. That is the power and magic of storytelling, and also the challenge of the storyteller, to create the context for the images and actions on the screen such that they'll have meaning. To engineer meaning. Anyways, we're going to talk about Erased now. So, here's the spoiler warning part. I'm going to be spoiling pretty much the entire first episode of Erased, and touching vaguely on some stuff that happens later. Just go and find and watch the first episode if you haven't. I mean, for me, some Swedish guy or something just told me to watch it very insistently, so I jumped in without any context. When I come back, I'm going to talk at you like you've pretty much just had that exact same experience. So, for those of you meeting me on the other side, holy crap, was this a strong opening episode. There's actually a lot to go over here, but I feel like we can cover most of it by just talking about the final moments in this episode, the final revival. Now, I ain't gonna explain what revival is because you're supposed to have already watched the episode. This video doesn't have any training wheels. So here's the central question of this video. Why does this final moment resonate so powerfully with so many audiences? Why does it pack such a huge punch? I've got 3 reasons, which I'm going to cover later. But first, I feel like a lot of people's first instinct is to contribute this to the fact that, well, he gets to do his life over again. He's a kid, he gets a do-over. Everyone wants a do-over. And I've talked and worked with a lot of writers who would stop there and say that that's good enough. Do-over, man, it's the most relatable thing ever. Everyone's gonna love it. We just need to make the main character a cat girl, call it a day, and we can all go home. No. You're staying after tonight. If you take nothing else away from this video, then remember that a storyteller cannot rely on externals, things the audience brings in with them, so to speak, to generate their meaning and emotion. So how do you do it? Well, let's check out what Erased does. 1. It strengthens the extrinsic meaning. So, I just told you not to rely on this, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done, and done well. Erased spends a lot of time in the first few minutes giving you a window into the protagonist's life, letting you know that his life really isn't particularly great. He's 29, lives alone, delivers pizza, and struggles as a manga writer. And if you've ever felt like your life has gone down the wrong path, you might find yourself sympathizing with him. And sympathy is a pretty good thing to have for a character, especially the main character. We want someone to root for. It might not be enough to carry us through to the bitter end, but at least it's something to keep us watching for now. Of course, you might not like the guy at all, and that's the risk. You might have conflicting feelings. After all, he seems like kind of a bummer. He's sour, cynical, negative. That's why you can't rely on this kind of sympathy. It's kind of a crapshoot. So Erased does paint its main character as a guy who would really benefit from doing his life completely over, which when the big revival comes in at the end of the episode, definitely does help to give it some of its punch. It creates a lot of expectations about what Satoru might do in a given situation, creates some sympathy, and even sets the stage for some thematic richness that comes later on in his tale. All in all, well done, and economically done too. 2. Duck, duck, goose. When I talk about economy, I mean that within the first 5 minutes, we already understand a ton about our main character, and likely already been surprised. You might think that a whiny cynic like Satoru wouldn't be particularly heroic, but when his first revival rolls around, we see that he's willing to risk his life to help other people. Which is nice because, if nothing else, the story would be pretty dull otherwise. In this first episode, we see a very clever, ridiculously simple, vastly underrated, and surprisingly underutilized story device. The Rule of 3. You've probably heard of it somewhere before, but you might have absorbed some misconceptions about its significance. There are 3 revivals in the first episode of Erased, and that's not by accident. 3 is the minimum number of events we need to experience in order to pick out a pattern. I mean, think about it. If this episode had 1 revival, it's like, okay, what even just happened? 2 revivals, and it's like, oh, okay, sometimes he goes back in time really far when he revivals. That's pretty cool. When we see these first 2 revivals, we instinctively absorb certain ideas about what rules they follow due to their similarities. So in the final moments of this episode, when we see Satoru's mother murdered and him getting framed for the whole ordeal, we think we're one step ahead of the writers. All right, got it. A bad thing just happened. He's going to go back in time, save his mom, and then they're going to continue their pursuit of the villain because he just went and made it personal. That's generally a really bad idea for a thing for villains to do in, a crime story. Whatever. It's going to be freaking awesome. And yeah, we get a revival, and yeah, it is pretty freaking awesome, but it's also completely different to what we expect, and so much more. The writers used the rule of 3 to create and then completely shatter an expectation, giving us what we wanted, but not in the way we expected. Duck, duck, goose. Keep the rule of 3 in mind. It's a really useful tool for when writing stories, jokes, YouTube videos. Number 3. Erased spends the first 5 minutes or so basically telling us about the protagonist's first world problems and trying to build up a little bit of sympathy. But how do you go beyond that? Alright, well, here's what we're gonna do. During those opening moments, it's hazy and really subjective, but you might start to get the feeling that Satoru's whole life situation is maybe a little bit unfair. Also, you might not feel that way. That's the risk of relying on externals to create emotion. Also, we see his first revival. He manages to save a kid's life, and that's pretty cool. Also, the driver dies anyway, so there's still some death leaking into the story already. Also, Satoru got hurt doing a good deed, and that definitely seems at least a little bit unfair. Also, we learn about a bunch of really bad stuff that happened when Satoru was a child. Abductions, murder, an innocent man being imprisoned. Also, second revival, which by the way, that whole previous sequence just primed us to perceive in a certain way. They probably managed to save a kid's life. Also, maybe Satoru's mother can catch the bad guy. But as Satoru hints at earlier, revival usually results in a net negative for him. So that foreshadowing is still giving the whole thing a negative pallor. Also, Irie is in this episode because every anime has a high school girl quota to meet. I don't fucking know. Then we hit the crisis. The killer kills Satoru's mother, gets away, and then Satoru is blamed for it. Alright, do you see what's going on here? The entire first episode of Erased is basically a big spiral of death and injustice. Though critically, it's not an uninterrupted spiral. We get some fun bantery bits and even a victory or two to help ease the tension and keep the audience from tuning out. But that's the general pattern that's been traced up to now. And here, at this moment, we reach the very nadir. And alright, one of the things that I said earlier is that you can't rely on external things that already exist in the mind of the audience to generate emotion. And that's a really subtle and important point, but at some point, you are going to have to take the leap and bring something in from the audience's being. The big key is in how deep you dig. Justice is a good example, because even though there's some degree of subjectivity across cultural paradigms, a sense of justice is pretty much a universal human trait. And there's a lot of commonality, which is good because you can't just craft and encode a brand new system of justice into every story you create. Or can you? You probably can't. Death is a little different. As sapient organisms, we all understand the difference between life and death. And more importantly, the quest to reverse the death of a loved one is pretty much the oldest story we humans have. And by pretty much, I mean literally. I mean, Greek mythology and Japanese mythology have almost plagiaristically similar tales on the topic. It's something that human beings have on the brain. That's why, at this moment, when everything pretty much hits rock bottom for Satoru, we're right there with him. I mean, unless there's some reason you didn't invest to the story due to the personal taste about the genre, or maybe you just don't like Japanese culture in general, or anime in particular, or Japanese schoolgirls in particular. But all points being equal, if you're buying into the story, a struggling manga artist might be a crapshoot, but guy whose parent was just murdered, and was just framed for that murder, isn't. That's something that we can feel viscerally. Death and injustice tug on something deep inside us. It doesn't even matter whether or not we've actually experienced a similar situation before. But that's not even the magic trick. The magic trick is this. Did you catch that? In the final revival, Satoru gets flung back into the past. He goes so far back that not only did his mother's murder never happen, none of the other murders ever happened. The killer hasn't gotten away with anything because it hasn't happened yet, and the guy who was falsely imprisoned is still free. And because of that, because of this development that we've been carefully conditioned not to expect to happen in quite this way, we feel that shift full force. And as I've already elaborated at length, this is like prelingual primal stuff. You don't need to be a certain race, creed, nationality, age, orientation, favorite brand of toothpaste to make meaning out of the fact that if Satoru can pull it off, he now has the opportunity to transform injustice to justice and death to life. If. Because that life, there's a question mark after it. Justice comes with an asterisk or two. Life out of death, yes, but terms and conditions apply. So now, if you're the writer, now you get to go home, because you've put the central dramatic question of the story front and center in the audience's mind. Can he do it? Does Satoru have the strength and resourcefulness to succeed where Orpheus failed, to descend into the underworld and make it back home with Eurydice? Will he solve the mystery, find the killer, and overcome him in some kind of one-on-one final battle? Yeah, at this point, if you're the writer, you're golden. You managed to go beyond mere concern or curiosity, and you've created a near physiological need to know how this is all going to turn out. To go all the way to the end of the line. And that is how storytellers engineer meaning. That's why a little kid looking up at a sign in a language you probably don't understand without subtitles can move you to the very depths of your soul. That is why Erased's first episode will knock your socks off. Alright, Q&A? Q&A time. Well, that's cool and all, but the climax of Erased is kind of a meaningful event even without the context it built. You even said that earlier, that was your whole first point. Yeah, but the context it built elevated the subjective appeal of time traveling and getting a second chance by brilliantly applying storytelling techniques I really wanted to talk about. And it's just a fantastic opening all around. Rest assured that just about any image or event can be charged with meaning through story. Alright, well, what about that example you said earlier with the lady with the baby or whatever? What was that all about? Yeah, that was a totally random example. Okay, so, you can make meaning out of anything. What about if it's just a guy walking into a grocery store or something? A guy walking into a grocery store or something can be one of the best scenes in all of fiction. So just go watch The Hunt. It's a film by Thomas Vinterberg starring the guy you see on your screen right now. Alright, sure, but anything, really? What about if it's just a camera zooming in on a potted plant or something like that? Oh, I don't know. That's a tough one, Breaking Bad Season 4, Episode 13. I would drop my mic here, but it's actually pretty expensive. So if you're a storyteller, hopefully now you understand the importance of digging down just a little bit deeper if you really want to connect with the audience. And even if you aren't a storyteller, hopefully you get the idea that a carefully constructed context can make any image, action, or situation bring forth emotion out of nothing. Because if Isuna Hazekura can make you care about the price of pyrite in a mining town, and you will care very deeply about the price of fool's gold in a fictional mining town, then hopefully you understand just how powerful and important stories are. Because stories are engines for creating meaning. Thank you. Put a lot of time and love into this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it with people you think will enjoy it, or wherever you think it might start a good conversation, and don't forget to subscribe for more. And for those brave and intrepid souls who want to join me on my quest to understand stories better by digging just a little bit deeper, please check out my Patreon, linked below. Or if you're more like me and you hate commitment, check out the description for a link to a Gumroad tip jar. If you want to leave at least $1, I'll give you the song I'm listening to as well as a quick blooper from the video you just watched. Just for fun. It even supports PayPal. Viewer, we truly do live in the future. Whatever you choose to do, or if you do nothing at all, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.